Everybody, we had a few technical issues this morning and we still cannot see the wonderful Peter Burdon, but we'll get started, and we've got a few people joining us a little bit late. They've let us know. I'm going to start introducing myself, and then Peter, I'll let Peter introduce himself. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land on which we live, work and stand, and pay my respects to elders from the past, present, emerging, and extend that to all First Nations people that might be present today. For me, I am in Melbourne from the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sara Pantaleo. I'm a business coach and mentor, and I also am a non-executive director on boards. And these are just some of the brands that I've worked with. And my story today is going to be about my journey as La Porchetta CEO and what we did to create a crisis management plan and how we navigated it all. So, Pete, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, look, I'm Pete Burdon. I'm actually based in New Zealand, although I work in New Zealand and Australia. I have a few businesses. One is Media Training NZ, and the other one is Franchise Media Training. And basically, they do two things. The first thing is that we prepare businesses and franchises how to be ready for negative news media attention that can come if you have a crisis. And that mainly includes being ready for the media interview that is really inevitable in those situations. And the other one is coming up with a crisis communication plan. Sarah's going to be talking about crisis management, and then I'm going to be talking about crisis communication, which is sort of a little bit more of a sort of dig down niche into that. And the other side of my business is training and actually consulting businesses how to actually use the media to get positive attention for their business or their franchise. So my background is I'm a former journalist and a government press secretary, and I've had lots of clients from politics, from big and small business, from franchising, and I've got a couple of master's degrees, one from in New Zealand here in journalism, and another one UTS in Sydney that some of you guys might be aware of in communication management. So that's me.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Pete, and thank you for attending today, because it'll actually be really great for our attendees to see that richness of why it's important to know how to handle media. So I'll just, in due course, so our agenda today, I'll speak for about 15 minutes, then Pete will speak for about 15 minutes, and then there'll be opportunities for questions. Unfortunately, with the technical issues that we've had this morning, my co-host Maria is there in the background letting people in, and she might be writing things in the chat. However, I can't bring her on the screen, but she is there in the background. Maria McQuillan, who's from Consonate Financial, and she has a whole richness of experience in franchising and many other factors, but she helps small businesses and franchises really get funding and capital for their businesses as well. She gets you in a home as well, and she's there in the background helping us out. So without further ado, I'll tell you a little bit about La Porchetta. So La Porchetta in the beginning was a very small pizza restaurant in Melbourne, Australia, and it was founded by Rocco Pantaleo and Felicia Nania, right? It was just a quick takeaway shop, and basically they had two partners, one dream, and there was absolutely no systems and processes. And basically the recruitment policy for franchisees was really rudimentary. It was like, yeah, you got a few $100,000 and a pulse, you're in. So that was their recruitment process. And so it's, you know, I joined in 1996 coming from an IT background. I was with NAB in mainframe systems. And my brother, Rocky Pantaleo, asked me, can you help me set up the computer system? And this was our setup, right? So there were 12 restaurants in 1996, and this was my brother being interviewed by the Age newspaper here in Melbourne. He said, I'm going to have 30 of these restaurants. And across Australia and New Zealand, there are approximately 44 restaurants now. So he achieved his dream. But as you can see with all the different logos, it kept taking all different kind of transitions. But what did I bring into the business? What I brought into the business was structure, systems, processes, and tools. For a franchise systems to be able to grow, you need to have that, right? And so really it was really difficult for them to put up with me at first, but eventually we got there. So the evolution of La Porchetta and what it looks like today, I'm going to take you very quickly through it. This is what the restaurants look like today, but I like to show it to you according to the menu, right? And the first one you can see, you know, the La Porchetta and the logo. It was a really basic menu. It was just a takeaway pizza and pasta shop. You went in, you took it, and anyone that lived in Melbourne would know. People would sit on the middle of the strip and eat their pizza. Any Melbourne uni students, because the original one in Rathdown, Australia, is very close to Melbourne University, and you can see the evolution of the brand, right? And basically, it doesn't happen overnight. There needs to be a lot of structure for it to happen with that. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because it started from very humble beginnings with Rocky and Felice, and without the systems and processes and tools, they just did anything and everything by the seat of their pants. But over time, as we put structure into the business continued and grew. And I share this particularly with you because I left La Porchetta in 2020, because it'll be very relevant when I take you through the crisis management process. So along the way with the structure, La Porchetta didn't identify their customer. And it was really important they understood who their customer was, how to communicate with them, and what have you. And by the end of it, they identified multiple different customer, primary, secondary, and third, tertiary customer proposition, but understanding who they were, what they stood for, and went on. And one of the things that I'm going to take you through with this is that it takes many, many years to build a brand, right? You evolve and you go on and you put a lot of work into it, right? And they even identified their point of difference, and La Porchetta is quite a sophisticated restaurant now. It's a fully Italian restaurant. It's casual dining, fully licensed, a la carte. Primary is a female mother whom, you know, has kids, right? But we also have the young teenagers that come to La Porchetta, and they love the fact that they can order a glass of wine with their meal when they're 18. We then lose them when they get a better job, and then they rejoin us after they have kids. So it's an actual cycle, and it took many, many years to work all that out at La Porchetta. And, you know, all the marketing and the customer engagement of the brand has certainly evolved with the disruption. And this is one of the things when we talk about the crisis management, it's about understanding whatever businesses you're in. A couple of people joining us are a small business in aged care. A couple are in cleaning and franchise services. It's really, really, really clear with that marketing proposition and how you deliver it out there. In restaurants with the La Porchetta journey, there was loads of disruption. And some of the disruption was internal because we were growth pains and trying to manage franchisees and develop a better recruitment plan and whatever it might be, or it might be the delivery of Uber Eats and all that disruption. And while I was the CEO, we oversaw all that disruption and put in a lot of systems that helped La Porchetta manage COVID. Because one of the things before I left, we put some really strong systems on being able, because we had New Zealand franchisees, being able to communicate with them online. So we were operating virtual meetings for many years before COVID, setting up the system that people can log into it. And these are some of the things that you need to have in a brand. It doesn't happen overnight. But what is the crisis management plan, right? So a crisis is an out of ordinary event, disclosure, or set of circumstances, real or perceived, which seriously threatens safety, disrupts activity, or negatively impacts the reputation of the business or customer patronage. It's really important to understand that it doesn't need to be real. It can be perceived. So if there is a rumor out there about your brand, about your business, about your organization, or any of your leaders, if it's there, if it's perceived, it's real in your potential ideal client's mind, and they may lose trust in using your brand. So it's really, really important that you understand that. But, you know, what are the type of crises that can happen, right? Obviously in food, it's food poisoning. But the number one incident that happens today is cyber attacks and data breaches, right? And the difference between having a great crisis management plan and a bad one is how you're able to navigate it and still be around, right? I mean, when Facebook had this incident happen, I've just got one example here with Facebook, when Cambridge Analytica used their data, they were really nonchalant about it. It's like, yeah, but we didn't do it. They did it. A lot of people lost trust in Facebook at that point, and they actually lost years and years of trust with it. But back in the, you know, in your cases, everyone that's here today, if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat, how many of you do have a crisis management plan? Just put yes or no. The chat is in the top, the little bubble. So if you just click on it and then just type it in, that would be great to know. So basically, one of the things that can happen with food poisoning, right, is there was an incident in Rose is saying they don't have a plan, but I know Rose is based in South Australia. There was an incident many, many years ago of a company having a food poisoning incident of their small goods, and a small child died, and many, many other people had a lot of bacteria. They didn't know how to manage it. They didn't have a plan. They no longer exist. One of the things that you've got to understand is about building your brand and all the years that it takes to evolve it, stay abreast of your industry and what have you, right? It can take 5 minutes to lose it. So it's really, really important that you know what you need to do. What are the types of problems that you might have? You know, for instance, why I'm sharing La Porchetta is because my brother was he was the face of La Porchetta. Everyone in Victoria knew him as the face of La Porchetta. Him and his partner started, but his partner was more in the background, but he was more in the foreground. And he would use words, you know, like, you know, he liked fast cars, fast living, and he might use words that aren't, oh, welcome. Someone just made a comment in the chat. Okay, fantastic, thank you. Sorry about that, a bit distracted by the chat. Anyway, so basically we were worried about, will he be able to understand that our clients were mainly families and certain words couldn't be used, right? We had a franchisee, for instance, right? He was getting the council to help him get a permit, and a parliamentarian in Victoria went there and said, oh, and La Boqueta got their permit from the council with $1,000 bribe, right? Whether it was true or not was irrelevant. They went and interviewed our franchisee, and our franchisee goes, "Oh, $1,000, that's cheap." So you can imagine, right? The assumptions people were saying. He was trying to be light about it. But obviously you can't make comments like that, right? But I just want to take you through. We started our plan in 2009. I said, because I used to be part of the disaster recovery team at NAB, I had experience in this space, and I thought it was really important to manage Rocky and manage our reputation and understand if something goes wrong, who was going to do what. And we basically went through, we analysed the business, worked out what are all the items that could happen in the business, what could go wrong. It was meant to be a 6-month exercise. It actually took a lot longer than that. In actual fact, we started in 2008 from memory, and we ended up implementing in November 2009. It took approximately 18 months. And the reason for that was that when we started going through assessing our business, we realized we didn't have a risk management plan for the franchisees so that they could assess risks for their premises, because our restaurants didn't look exactly the same. So therefore, we had to fix our business, because if you have a plan and you know about it and you don't do anything about it, it's not going to work, right? So you've got to be true with it, and you've got to be realistic about it. We also realized that our franchisees didn't like reading emails. They were too busy working in the restaurant. And so we had to find a way that we could do a mass communication to the franchisees. And what actually happened was that we invested in an SMS software that we were able to send all the franchisees the details. So we went through and we identified that we could have food poisoning, we could have an incident with a staff member, a customer slipping and falling, all sorts of issues that we identified. But how we used the plan was in a totally different way. On March 2010, my brother was unfortunately killed on the road. And the way I found out about it was through the Age Online. So I got a call at 12 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and receptionist took the call from the Age Online, and she knew exactly what to do, because she had a script on her computer that said what to do if media called. And the only people that could speak to the media according to our crisis management plan was our marketing manager or myself. And basically the marketing manager was Anisha. She put the call through to me, and she knew exactly what to ask for. And they said, "Can you confirm that Mr. Sara Pantaleo has been involved in a fatal car incident?" So you can imagine, he's my brother, he's the managing director, I'm the CEO. You can just imagine the state that I would have been in at the time. So basically what happened though, the crisis plan came into gear. I notified my team. They were made aware of it. By that night, before the police released to the media that my brother had died, we had an SMS to the franchisees. We liaised with the police, an SMS to all the franchisees confirming that my brother had passed away, and not to worry, that we had things in hand. Because when we went through the crisis management plan, we identified experts that we might need in the time of a crisis. We had a PR person helping us. By that night, we had a statement written for the media. We had a statement written and a letter written for the franchisees, and it went out. And you can imagine that I wouldn't have been able to deal with all of that without a plan. So a crisis management plan doesn't mean that you avoid a crisis, but what it does is everyone knows what to do when. With us, we implemented a whole structure with the franchisees from top to bottom, where we had the plan, we had the incident management team, but we also implemented a cheat sheet for the franchisees to keep at their premises on what to do in a crisis, how to identify if it's a major notifiable incident. For instance, for a cleaning company, it might be that someone slipped and one of the staff members killed them, died. What do you do in that situation? Do we know? Who do we notify? Who do we call? Who does the franchisee call? What happens in that situation? Do we know what we need to do? In our case, we knew what we would do in a food incident, and our person that developed our food safety plan would be our expert that would assist us with that. And in actual fact, with one of my clients that I'm working with at the moment, because we're in the process of putting all their systems and processes in their business, and the crisis plan hadn't been devised yet, and they called me. They had a major incident that 30 people were feeling sick after a wedding. So automatically, panic mode. Have we poisoned people? And I was able to talk them through it, and they calmed the situation down. They contacted the environmental officer, they liaised with them. It turned out that it was an actual virus that was brought in by one of the guests, and they infected everybody else at the wedding. But it just took a process to do that. We developed the steps in place to manage the situation. But you might need to develop media statements or holding statements or things like that. And also you may need to, if it's a cyber attack, what if something happens at your head office if you're a franchisor? Do you have a backup site? Is your data backed up every day? So devising a crisis management plan also ensures that you get everything in your business right to ensure that you are ready to go. If there's a ransomware, if you've got your data backed up and you've got all your systems right, you don't need to worry about that, because you will shut that down and you will be able to reignite it somewhere else. So really, just quickly summarizing, crisis plan means you'll be prepared to deal with any incident, minimize the impact of any possible negative reputation, and set up the systems and processes for everyone to know their role during a crisis, right? And like Warren Buffett says, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to lose it. Now, what I'll do for all of you, everyone that's registered, will get a fact sheet that will take you through the key elements of creating a crisis management plan. Plus, I've got quite a few blogs on my website that you can look at, but do reach out to me at any point as well. I'm going to stop sharing now, and Peter is going to share his presentation. But Maria has put some things in the chat. If you want to type in, have you considered the various types of crises that could impact your business? Okay, Peter.
Great, Sarah. Now, can people see people won't be able to see me, will they?
No, unfortunately, your camera's not on. But
Okay.
if you share your screen, though, they'll be able to see your screen.
Okay, so where do I do that?
See that arrow at the top where it says share? Do you have an arrow?
Nope.
Sorry, everyone, won't be long.
No, I don't seem to have an arrow. At the top of the screen, you say?
The arrow at the top. There's an arrow that says share.
Doesn't seem to be on mine, unfortunately. That's right. Yeah. No, sorry, there's no error there.
Okay, so do you want to just send me your presentation and I'll share it? That's strange that you don't have an arrow.
Okay. Shall I email it to you?
Yeah. Next to the leave button, apparently.
Okay, I'll have another look.
But just email it to me and I'll quickly share it.
Yep. Okay.
Apologies for this, everyone. We've had technical issues all day. Have you emailed it, Pete?
Just going now.
Okay, no worries.
There is a photo on there. There is a video, little video on there. I just hope that doesn't make it a bit difficult.
Yeah, just in the chat, that's a good one. Data loss. And, you know, with the, you know, the data loss is a really good one because at the moment, with all the confidentiality and privacy laws, it's really, really important that you protect the data and you have systems to do that. And one of the things that we implemented at La Poqueta was also when we had people working from home, how they actually accessed our systems. Because it was really important that they didn't compromise our, they didn't actually compromise and get access to our financial data or anything like that. So yeah, data loss is a huge one. And I must say, there's been a report that I'm happy to share that's been released by the ACCC in relation to cybersecurity. I'll share it with the fact sheet. Pete, I've got your presentation. So I'm about to start sharing it. And then just tell me when you want me to go to the next page. Can everyone see that? I'll come back to you, Rose, about the adverse behaviour of franchisees. Pete, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So if we just kick on through, so you're going to be talking about the news media, dealing with the news media when a crisis strikes. So if we can just kick on past there, Sarah. Okay, so if you just whack down a couple of things here, just put all the, just go. So we're going to look at a crisis communication plan briefly. Then we're going to have a look at media interviews because, you know, that normally you will have to do media interviews if there is a crisis. A lot of people try and avoid it. But realistically, to really get through these things, you really do have to agree to those because otherwise you just lose the entire control of the story. And then we'll just have a bit of a Q&A. So if we can just whack on ahead there, Sarah. Okay, so one thing, and this is, Sarah touched on this a bit earlier as well, is that the thing is, this has all changed totally, even since Sarah had that issue in 2010. Because of social media now and the internet, what's happened is, as you well know, if there's an issue, media get onto it. They'll literally contact you, you know, within literally 10, 15 minutes or so, and ask you for a response. And of course, at this point, you just might not even know this thing's happened. But realistically, you have to respond very quickly. And so that's one thing we're going to look at shortly about how we do that. Just kick on there, Sarah. And a big part of this is we can't wait for others. Like often what people would do, they would just say, oh, well, if we have a crisis hit, we'll just contact the public relations company and they can help us out through it. The problem with that is that that's probably going to take a couple of hours before anything's going to happen. And realistically, with media and your other stakeholders as well, and your other stakeholders will depend on what your business is, but you need to get hold of them at the minimum within an hour. Because what will happen is if you don't have a statement or something ready for media, all they'll say in their news story is that you refuse to comment. And people assume from that that you either don't know what's going on or you don't even care. So you've got to have something ready to go, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So basically, in a nutshell, your reputation, it's all about your preparation. Because Sara mentioned a few examples earlier. I could mention a lot too of franchises and businesses that have either gone under or been seriously impacted by not dealing with a crisis properly. Because the old adage is true that people don't, normally people won't rate you on the crisis itself. They'll rate you on how you respond to it. And if you respond to it properly, you can actually grow your reputation. I know that sounds strange, but if there's some incident where, let's say, there might be a death or something, and you get out there and you front it and you show empathy and all these sorts of things, people think, well, that's great. There's been an issue. These people have shown empathy. They've just told us what they're going to do about it. So that's all good. But if you don't say anything, or you're scared of media, or nothing happens, you're guilty as charged. Because the media always want a villain, that you're either a villain or a victim with media. And if you don't front, you're often made out to be the villain. So we just kick through there again, Sara. So the first thing you need in your crisis communication plan, and this again, it's what Sara mentioned before in this, I mean, there can be a bit of crossover here because a crisis communication plan is sort of more focused on the communication than the overall management that Sara was talking about, all those things you need to have them ready in place as well. But you definitely need to predict what could go wrong, and you need to have statements ready for those things. Literally have them ready to go where you can, I mean, they're actually called holding statements, so they don't have to be very big, but you need something that you can send media and that you know, very early on when this thing happens. Because as I said before, if you don't, the story will say you refuse to comment or something like that. But if you have a holding statement, as they're called, that just says, hey, we're aware of the situation, our hearts go out to the victims, we're doing what we can to sort this out, or something like that, that will get into the news story. And so then that's good, because then that goes out through social media, everyone sees it, you want to be in that, you need to be in that, because if you're not, as I say, it's like you don't care or you don't know what's going on. So that's why you need to have a real brainstorm about what could go on. And I've done these for a number of companies, and you know, you could probably think of hundreds, but normally there's about sort of five to eight that you, for your particular business. Like, you know, for example, you know, food poisoning. Another big one is allegations, because I've spoken with mainly franchises, I have to say, where there have been allegations made that are totally false, but you have to deal with them, because as Sara said before, it's about perception. I mean, one was a very well-known burger joint where someone had all these maggots on the burger, and it was in their wrapper. But they realised it wasn't their burger because the burger bun was all wrong. It just couldn't have been. But they didn't do anything about it, so they got really hammered. And a lot of people to this day will think that they had a major food, you know, outbreak of food poisoning. So again, brainstorm and get those statements ready. It doesn't have to take forever. This stuff doesn't have to take as long as you might think it does. So the next thing, if we can go down, Sara, is the next thing you need to do is those have got to be really brief, okay? Because like I say, you won't know much at this early stage anyway, but the issue a lot of people have is they'll send the media a statement that's quite detailed. And of course, what media do with that, they'll pick out the odd sentence here and there and they'll use that. So you don't want to give them that opportunity. You want to make this thing literally 3 or 4 sentences, so there's nothing they could quote you out of context from that statement. Okay, if you just kick on down there, Sara. And the other thing you have to worry about here is, that's basically what I'm talking about with the context issues, because they'll pull little pieces out of something detailed and can make you look silly. And the other thing here that a lot of people make the mistake of is that the other stakeholders you contact, like, you know, maybe your clients or your customers or your you know, one franchise situation, obviously the franchisees would be the first ones to get these statements. But you can't send information to one group of stakeholders that you don't want media to see. Okay, because often people send the media something and they'll send everyone else something else. The media will find all that. Okay, so you've got to be very careful not to say anything that you shouldn't say. Okay, so if we just kick on there, Sarah, here's an example of a bit of a holding statement. Okay, you can see how basic this is. This was a COVID example because a lot of places should have really been ready for a COVID case. So you can say basically just statement from, and then just like to acknowledge the worker that's tested positive. So that's the empathy side of things. Then we're doing all we can to make sure there's no further spread. You could say an example of that, because again, we really do want to try and help the media if we can. It's the best way if it's possible. And then just a reassurance statement that the health and safety of our staff is our top priority. So that would go to the media, and then they've got something to use, and it's not you refuse to comment. Okay, so you do those for all those different situations. You just kick on there, Sarah. Okay, if you just knock down to two more bullets as well. Okay, so there are particular roles in the crisis communication team that we need to look at. Obviously, the spokesperson, because someone has to talk to media about this. Because like I said earlier, if you don't talk to media, what happens is the media will still run their stories, but they won't use you, they'll use someone else. And normally if they use someone else, that'll be someone that's probably not overly sympathetic towards you. It might be victims, it might be customers, who knows who it might be a competitor. Because they'll come to you initially. And so the best idea is to give the holding statement first, like I mentioned earlier. But then if this thing is quite big, they'll come back to you and say, hey, we want to do an interview, particularly if it's TV or radio, but also often print. And if you say no, then they'll go and find someone else to do the story. So when they come to you, that's your opportunity to actually control the story. You can control it because they're always going to come to you with that. And that's where the media skills come in that we're going to talk about shortly. Okay, you need someone that's going to, just go back a sec, crisis community, someone needs to lead this communication response, okay? And that's often not going to be the CEO, that's probably going to be someone else, because the CEO, or the franchisor is going to be so busy doing all sorts of things. Overarching sort of manager of this thing could also be the spokesperson. So you need someone else in your sort of senior leadership team to become the crisis communication leader. And we haven't got time to go into all that detail. And you might get a PR person to come and help later, but at the early stages, you need to have someone that's going to do all this stuff. And one thing you need there is staff guidelines. Because again, I mentioned the franchise example again, but all the staff need to know what the guidelines are, like who talks to media. What if it's a franchisee and someone goes to the franchisee outlet? What if someone goes to a franchisee outlet somewhere that's not involved in the crisis and asks that franchisee about, oh, have you got a similar crisis here because these guys have? What can and can't they post on social media about the crisis? All these things need to be in a staff guidelines sheet. And again, it doesn't have to be much, but it needs to be organised. And then you need an online manager, someone that's going to monitor the internet, social media sites, post things, make sure there's no misinformation there, organise how they're going to actually fix if there is disinformation there. And ideally there, you would also have a media monitoring service that shows, that will ping you emails whenever your business actually comes up in the media in social media, because when that happens, you can normally get a crisis before it happens. For example, if it is a food poisoning thing, there might be one mentioned somewhere on social media that you wouldn't know anything about. But if you get pinged this post, you can go and talk to that person, say, hey, really sorry about this, before it actually blows up into a full-scale crisis. There's a lot of situations like that. So we just kick on now, Sarah. So they're the main, obviously we're going through this all pretty quick. The next thing is who's on your contact list, because there's going to be all sorts of people you'd need to contact. You don't want to have to think about that at the time. You need to have those people on speed dial. For example, often you'll need a lawyer. You'll still want to have a PR person that you can get hold of as the thing progresses. Obviously all your franchisees if you're a franchise, your suppliers, your clients, your customers. Because, the one bonus thing with social media these days is that, you are able to communicate with your people as well. And ideally you would contact them just before you contact media. Okay, but you do need to contact media very, very quickly. And then there are places to organise where For example, if you might need a press conference, which, you know, I know you probably wouldn't want to have, but you may need to if there's a swarm of media coming at you, you really do need to talk to them. So where would you have that? Those sorts of things. There's a few other places. If you're a franchise, you need to make sure you've got like a Zoom thing or something organised where you can get all the franchisees together to talk about this crisis. And hey, if a journalist comes to you in Perth, this is what you need to say to them. Here's the statement you need to send them. All these sorts of things. So if we just kick on again. So I think if you just whack down there, again, we haven't got a lot of time here, but there are some things with media interviews. I've already mentioned that generally speaking, you really do want to agree to them, because then you get far more of the coverage is about you talking, not someone else. And there are ways where you can actually control that interview. I know because a lot of people write, what are the questions could I get asked and how am I going to answer those? There are particular ways where you come up with your own message, and then you basically what we call bridge back to that message all the time, okay? And you come up with more interesting ways of making the points in your message. Okay, so that might sound a little bit confusing at this point, but believe me, there are ways to do it. If we just click on again here. Because you'd always, with a media interview, you always have a 3-point message that's basically clear, brief, and still of interest. And so with that example before of the COVID case, this could well be your 3-point message here. And you see what happens with this is you keep coming back to that all the time, but you'll do it in different ways. And we haven't got time to go into those difficult ways. And there are some difficult questions you might get asked, but we'll know what they are. We can plan for those. And there's one example I've got coming up. I don't think we've really got time to go through it. If we could just kick on though, Sarah, just really quickly. Yeah, just kick on again. Don't worry about that. But one classic question that's really difficult to answer that I'll just really will cover here very quickly is if you get asked to speculate on something. Like, for example, let's say it is food poisoning. Often the media will say, okay, you've had this food poisoning issue. Can you guarantee you won't have another food poisoning issue in the next few months? Of course, you can't say, I can't guarantee that, because what that does is it gives the journalist the ability to say, you know, franchise or business owner admits another food poison outbreak likely or possible. And we don't want that. So, and there are a lot of situations like that where you can be asked to speculate. So what you do in those situations that is quite fair, you just say, look, I wouldn't want to speculate on that. Our focus is on sorting this out, or our focus is on looking after the victims, or something like that. And if you get asked again, you say the same thing again. And if you get asked a third time, my advice always is you say, look, I believe I've answered your question. And then you go back to one of your points again, because that's just one of those awkward questions that you just can't answer. Okay. So we've skimmed through that really quickly. There's obviously more involved. And social media, there's particular ways of dealing with that. But just to sum up, you know, this has all changed, and your reputation really is all about preparation. So you really do need a crisis communication plan. Well, I mean, ultimately you need a crisis management plan like what Sarah's talking about. But as part of that too, you really do need a crisis communications plan that goes into that in more detail. And you do need at least one person, possibly two, to talk to media, because, you know, it is a unique skill. Just because you're a good presenter doesn't mean you can talk to media, because it's a totally different situation, because only snippets of what you say are ever going to get into a news story. And so many people get into trouble, but if you know how to do it, you really can master it. And so obviously this is stuff I do a lot, and we may be following up with other things, but I do have crisis communication plans and media training of different options as well. So that's really, really fast, but back to you, Sarah.
No worries. No, thank you for that, Pete. And just as an example of that, in relation to what you're saying, where you need all the things and the comms plan as well, in a franchise system, it's really, really important that there's the training as well of the team and the franchisees. And when you might create an incident management team, which might be brought together in a major crisis, what you do is you will have franchisees representing franchisees. So you may choose a couple of franchisees that might be on your advisory committee to be part of that, an operations person, etc., etc., etc. So you bring all the right people at the time of a major crisis occurring, but you are planning ahead. So now absolutely you need a comms plan, and especially in a franchise system is more crucial, because the comment that Rose made in our chat in relation to it could be an adverse behavior of a franchisee, what happens is if a franchisee does anything, it affects the whole brand.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if you don't have that communication flow, that the franchisees are really clear that they may be able to make some statements. And what we did at La Porchetta for the franchisees, we did have some holding statements that they could make, such as, you know, and it could be in an aged care facility with COVID, because, you know, you've got vulnerable people and, you know, one person may have COVID, and it's about how do you communicate to the family, how do you communicate to the public, how do you communicate with the media, and that comms covers all of that.
Yep, absolutely. And with a franchise too, any franchisee could be the focus of this thing, you know, so that because chances are something's going to happen at a particular franchisee, you know, and then it blows up from there.
Yeah, so I mean, we had statements for the franchisees such as we did have it was really quite interesting, because I was doing a big presentation on crisis management planning at New Zealand. And when I was attended at the New Zealand Franchise Association as a keynote speaker, and I landed in Auckland and my phone went crazy. And we had an incident with a franchisee HR issue where they were underpaying people. And it was crazy because I got all these things, but my team were just telling me, we've done X, Y, and Z. This is where we're at. We've contacted the franchisee. And one of the ops guys went out to the franchisee site because the media was at the franchisee's doorstep.
Yep.
So, yeah, so if you've got a plan, you can be ready for those kind of situations. But can I ask those of you that are here, do you have any further questions or any clarification? No one typing? Yeah, oh, here we go. Rose is typing something. One of the things that worked really well with the recent client issue that we had, oh, here we go. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, yes, Rose has asked if she can get a copy of the recording. Yes, I just need to cut it down because we had a pre-meeting, and I will get that sent to you. But if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask them. But what I was going to add is one of the recent incidents with a client that I had was that because the incident was a food safety incident, and the actual client was threatening to sue the business. And one of the ways to communicate with them, because, you know, the business was really panicking about that, and my advice to them was, that's okay. We don't know what happened. We're investigating it. So keep them informed. And the first thing was, we're just hoping everybody's safe and everyone's well, and we're just focused on your well-being. We're investigating the matter. We've reported the matter to the environmental officers, to Vic Health, and we are cooperating with all the investigations. Instead of getting worried about, and by the way, we notified the insurance company so that they knew what was happening, because there might have been potential claims. So, you know, when you're going through the plan, you may think, oh, am I covered by insurance? And that might be one of the things that you need to check with your insurance company and what have you, right? So the crisis management plan, it actually gets you ready for who does what when, right? Do we have all our systems and processes right in our business? Do we have a communications plan? Do we know how we're going to communicate with Vic Health, with our clients, with the community, if it is on social media, right? And that's really, really important. Okay, I cannot stress that enough. Did you want to add any final comments, Pete?
No, I've just having a look in the comments here. I see, I think it was Rose there mentioned adverse behaviour of a franchisee. I mean, that is quite a big one for a lot of companies, or a staff member of a franchisee. I mean, I've actually dealt with a few issues like that over here. None of them actually ended up in media, but one, I won't obviously say who the franchise was, but one, there was a video camera in this house and someone got caught stealing some stuff out of a cabinet. And just imagine if that did get into the news. I mean, that franchise would just lose all credibility. But even with that, there are ways you can get onto it and deal with it, early.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And even if people are threatening you, if you're doing things right, it's really, really important that you're also not saying that you're doing something and pretending, right? Because that doesn't work, does it, Pete? You've got to be real, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's funny. It's a funny thing, but the Chinese word for crisis comes from two words. One is threat, and the other one's opportunity. So that is quite interesting, because it can go because I mean, you're getting lots of publicity, obviously, but if you show you care and you're actually dealing with whatever it is, you can actually grow your business. I know that sounds awful.
Oh, yes. And my client actually grew their trust with their local environmental officer tenfold, because what it turned out to be is that when they did the investigation, there were people throwing up before the wedding, and they managed all of that and what have you. And they actually came up trumps, that everything that they do was amazing, and thank you, you contacted us and what have you. And it actually worked in their favor at the end.
Definitely.
So thank you. I want to thank my co-host, Maria McQuillan. You haven't heard much from her today, but she's been in the background doing things. I want to thank you all for attending. And Pete, thank you very much. What I'll do with the fact sheet, I'm going to send you all our details, and feel free to contact us if you want anything. And I will also send you a copy of the recording. Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yes, Sarah.
Bye.